All right. Welcome everyone to the final concurrent session of day 3 of the ninth annual symposium on environmental justice and health disparities. This symposium has been hosted by Dr. Jacoby Wilson, who's the director of the Center for Community Engagement, Environmental Justice and Health here at the University of Maryland. My name is Vivek Ravichandran, and I'll be the moderator for this particular session. I'm currently an environmental health PhD candidate here at the University of Maryland, and I've worked closely with Dr. Wilson and many of our esteemed panelists here today on community-driven air quality monitoring. Today, we have an exciting session that's entitled Environmental Justice, Goods Movement, and Air Quality Issues in New Jersey. This session will take on the style of PowerPoint presentations, after which we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for an audience Q&A. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers in the order in which they'll be presenting. First up, we have Ms. Kim Gaddy. Ms. Gaddy is the director of the South Ward Environmental Alliance. She's also the National and New Jersey Environmental Justice Director for Clean Water Action. She's been advocating for communities impacted by industrial pollution and the goods movement system in Newark and across the country for the past 22 years. Thank you for being here today, and we look forward to your presentation on the partnership. Next up, joining us virtually is Ms. Dinah Anderson. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Dinah Anderson. She is the program manager of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. She's a dedicated social justice advocate with a robust background in nonprofit and social sector environments. Her extensive involvement spans various marginalized communities, focusing on a wide array of social injustices. Thank you for joining us virtually, Ms. Anderson. Next, joining us here physically is Mr. Terrence Bankston. Terrence is the Senior Ports and Freight Campaigner for the Oceans and Vessels Program with Friends of the Earth. As an EJ activist, Terrence discusses and promotes the Justice 40 Act and engages in projects designed to support community-based organizations and environmental justice groups. Thanks for joining us here today. Next up, one of our panelists to join us virtually is Ms. Christine Schell. Ms. Schell manages the Office of Environmental Public Health and Analysis out of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection Commissioner's Office. She coordinates the New Jersey's Environmental Public Health Tracking Program, and her team has developed the EJ Map tool. And she's involved with linking public health considerations into climate resilience planning. Thank you for joining us virtually, Ms. Schell. And last, but certainly not least, we're joined by Dr. Robert Lombok. Dr. Lombok is a physician scientist and associate professor in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health and Justice at the Rutgers School of Public Health. His research focuses on the health effects of air and water pollution in communities that are overburdened by multiple environmental stressors. I want to thank all of our panelists here today for joining us, both physically as well as virtually. And without further ado, let's get right into the presentation series. Ms. Gaddy, if you wanted to begin, I'll just pull up your presentation.
Thank you, Vivek. And thank Dr. Jacoby Wilson for the partnership that he provides to the South Ward Environmental Alliance. And as the slides are being pulled up, I just kind of want to give you a snapshot into our community. The South Ward neighborhood is the largest ward in the city of Newark, New Jersey. We have over 75,000 members in our community. We are the backyard of the second largest port in the U.S. The first is the Port of Los Angeles and Long Branch. Each and every day at our port, between 25 and 30,000 trucks come in and out the port. 2,500 to 3,500 stay on our local roads. The South Ward, if you look at a stretch of our Dayton Street neighborhood, and you'll see a slide momentarily, within a 5-block radius, we have a Superfund site. We have 6 different recycling facilities. We have Sims Metals Management, which is the largest recycling metal in the world. We have numerous warehouses, and so the cumulative impacts of pollution is actually killing us. And so our port is the economic engine for the region, but is a death zone for our community. And so that's why I founded the Southport Environmental Alliance. We are an alliance of residents and community-based organizations with a focus on environmental justice in our South Ward. And our mission is to cultivate healthy and vibrant neighborhoods by ensuring residents' voices are heard and they are active participants in the decision making. The next slide shows Dayton Street neighborhood, where it's our industry versus our residents. And in that slide, you can actually see all the different industries as I described that is along the corridor. This is another map that shows the different contaminated sites to just kind of point out and illustrate to you the cumulative impacts of pollution that we suffer from. When we think about warehouses, that they also contribute to the pollution, next slide, in our community. And within New Jersey, there are 1,777 warehouses, over 100,000 square feet. 1.9 million residents live within 0.5 miles of a warehouse. 10 or more warehouses are under construction. And then when you put it in this context of, next slide, of our city, Newark, New Jersey, in our county, Essex County, 114 warehouses, over 100,000 square feet. When you think about the daily truck trips, it's 14,960. 16,000 are children under the age of 5. And the zip code 07114 has the most warehouses, which is the zip code in the South Ward of the city of Newark. Next slide. When you look at our charts, this is just kind of a chart that shows the proportion of communities living around warehouses, and you can see based on the color of our skin and the zip code we reside in, shows you how much pollution we suffer from on a daily basis. Next slide. This slide is an NO2 slide. It's an asthma map for Essex County area. And we are, I don't have a pointer, but I will show you where we are, but you can see basically how much pollution and the high number of asthma rates that are in our community. In the South Ward and the city of Newark, 1 out of 4 children suffer from asthma versus 1 out of 10 in the Essex County region. And so that is really alarming, and that's why the air monitoring project that we partnered with VVET and the University of Maryland, next slide, to really drill down at a hyper-local level what is happening in our community. And my environmental justice organizer, Sara Rashidi, who is sitting here, is the individual who not only put this presentation together, but she is responsible for this project. So I want to thank her. And so we utilize purple air monitors and air beams. And these are some pictures of the actual project. Next slide. This is a picture of the actual air quality monitoring sensors. And in the South Ward, we have them located at 10 different locations. The locations include our Clinton Hill Early Childhood Center, because we want to make sure the most vulnerable population, children, we can actually see what the air quality is. We have one on our hospital, North Bethesda Hospital, one at a business club, Eclipse, Weequahic Park, where our community goes and hang out and recreate. Hawthorne Avenue Deli, another business. We have one at the International Longshoremen Association. When you talk about the ports, the ILA is the union that represents our workers, and so we have one on their facility, and then we have 2 at the Newark fire stations. Next slide. This slide kind of gives you a clear picture of the purple air monitor, and it shows you, it indicates through the sensors and the tracking what the levels are, so that individuals in the community can actually see in real time how bad the air is at any given moment. And what was so great about us having this information and the assistance of Vivek and his staff when we had the fires that was happening from Canada, right? The DEP and some of the other local residents, the EPA, residents was able to go on these purple air monitors and actually see what the air quality was at that given moment. The next slide shows a co-location at our Newark Fire Department where SADA is working with a member of the Rutgers EOSHI department to actually co-locate the system so that DEP monitor was connected to our monitor to ensure that the data that we was receiving was accurate. The next slide just shows some of the monitors in action. It is very easy to, you see how small it is, and it's very easy to kind of locate right outside of a building. So it was really important for our community members and our community advisory board members to be a part of not only the selection of the locations, but also being able to go by and see where they are at any given time. It's really important that when you do any kind of air monitoring project, that you include the community and the residents because they are the local experts. They live in the community. They want to be a part of what the solutions are. And then one of the reasons, next slide, that we connected our warehouses, the high level of asthma rates, and the purple air monitors is because we want to focus on good jobs and clean air in our community. As an environmental justice organizer, it is really important that we understand that as humans, we have a right to breathe clean air. That is our human birthright. And it shouldn't be because individuals reside to live in certain zip codes and because the hue of their skin is a different color that they have to suffer from the environmental injustices and disproportionate levels of pollution. And so we participated in a whole campaign that focuses on good jobs and clean air. We fought the Amazon facility to ensure that they would not have an Amazon built right next to our community, which was already overexposed to multiple pollution sources. And so as we fight for environmental justice, as we fight for health justice, as we fight for economic justice, it is real important that you have the tools and the proper strategies to empower and engage the residents. And so the work that we do, and that we will continue to do, our next phase is we're going to work with Vivek and Dr. Jacoby Wilson with some Black carbon air monitors, because that is the next, that is the next phase of our air monitoring that we want to focus on. And we want to be able to place monitors around our port. The next slide is our contact information, where you can reach out to Asada, who is lead on this, and my information as well. And so I want to just thank you all for the opportunity to hear a quick 10-minute snapshot of what is happening in the city of Newark, and through great partnerships with University of Maryland and Dr. Jacoby Wilson and Vivek on how individuals can engage and they have the power to change what is happening in their community. The power is vested in us, so continue to do the work that is required. And remember that nothing without us is for us. So thank you, and that is mine. 10 minutes, I'll give you 50 seconds.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Gaddy. I think it's really great that you described some solutions and some success stories and ended on that note. So thank you so much. Next up is Dinah Anderson. So I think she's on the Zoom. So could we?
May I be granted permission to share my screen?
She needs permission to share.
On the host.
Could we get the host?
Can you pull yours up?
All right, give me 1 second. I'll see if I can pull your slides up. Dinah, could you email me your slides again, and I'll just pull it up really quickly, if possible?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. So while we're waiting, Terrence, would you like to present next? And then, oh, her slides came in. Never mind. All right. Could we switch back to this laptop view? Perfect. All right, Ms. Anderson, if, can you see our screen?
No. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I don't think we can hear her. Is there a way to?
Can you hear us? Don't be on mute. You're on mute.
Hello?
Is there a way to project her voice to the screen or? Okay.
Off now.
Can anybody hear me? I can hear you.
It's very vague.
Yeah, I think the Zoom can hear me, but not in the room.
Try now. Can you hear me?
Terrence, do you want to go ahead and present until we rectify this? Okay. right? Slides are up here.
So I'm gonna go in order from my laptop. Again, I'm Terrence Bankston. I am the Senior Ports and Freight Campaigner for Friends of the Earth. Friends of the Earth, in short, is a national and international nonprofit that probably does everything under the sun environment. But as far as my particular department, which is the Oceans and Vessels Program, my role was created, it's fairly new for Friends of the Earth. It was created to expand the port work that Friends of the Earth had been doing under the leadership of my supervisor, John, who's maybe on the call. And with a focus on the Mid-Atlantic, Southeast, and the Northwest regions, understanding that the Mid-Atlantic is very important because where New York and New Jersey Port Authority goes, so can all the other ports on the East Coast. And while our friends at the Newark port really don't like being compared to California all the time or too often, we can understand that California and Washington State are not perfect, but they are progressive. And they do have great community programs and also great greening practices around electrification and other issues that decrease emissions. Next slide. Just to highlight a few of our partners, obviously the Southwood Environmental Alliance, the University of Maryland Center for Community Engagement and Environmental Justice and Health. It's great to have universities and institutions, education institutions prioritizing environmental justice as well. Parents Engaging Parents, Harambe House, and recently we partnered with federal departments, Department of Homeland Security around port resiliency, and then also the Department of Energy, partnering with them around green corridors. And so what we learned from that experience is that we have to be operate at every level as environmental justice stakeholders. We must be on the grassroots level, on the front, remaining on the front line, down in DC lobbying, but we also need to be in those rooms talking to those commissioners and those directors who create these RFPs in their offices, right? And sometimes it's not, the rubber isn't meeting the road. It does not fit the needs of communities. It's, sometimes they take a blanket approach. What's available for one port is available for all ports, but it may not fit. Obviously, California and New York and New Jersey Port Authority are two different ports, two different environments. Next slide. An ambassador program, something that is fairly a new approach, not just for folk, but I think for organizations that are considered big greens. Part of our effort with launching a environmental justice ambassador program is not to be the movement, but to offer more support for movements. Through our sub-grants, we don't take funding from government, right? So that allows us to have hard and tough discussions or discourses around this. But when we fund our sub-grantees, like the Southwood Environmental Alliance and like the Delaware Coalition for Community Benefits Agreement down in Wilmington, they are not allowed to use those funds to lobby. Lobbying is extremely important to policy, anything policy driven. And it can't just happen in DC. All politics are local. And so we utilize these folks who come from those communities we are working with to ensure that FO is in tune with what's going on in respective communities and always aligned with the environmental justice principles of empowering those who we support in those communities to be their own voice and get the work done themselves. And so this is our approach to offering additional support where needed. Air pollution from port activities has been linked to higher rates of asthma, heart disease, cancer, and early deaths in those that live, work, and go to school near them. Ken Gallagher knows all too well. And so does Asada about the number of absences, the high number of absences being due to, the majority of our absences being due to asthma. And so how we treat our trees, how we treat our air is extremely important. Teaching young people who are on these phones in games at 5 o'clock in the morning, when that alert goes off, you might not want to play outside. We have to go that young. We have to plant those seeds that young. Okay? And so this is Rutherford and Miller 2019 adverse health impacts on laborers. So what about those who work at the port, right? They are important too. And so we want ports to have an internal, external customer approach where you value what works for the people inside will work for the people outside. If it's not working, if you're not protecting those who are your internal customers, you darn sure don't have the best interest of those who live in the communities around you, right? Next slide. Why is maritime soot pollution? Has anyone heard that term before, soot? You probably know what it is. It's a black substance that sometimes if you ask longshoremen, they'll blow their nose and black substance is coming out. Sometimes you may cough and you see maybe a little dark. That's from soot. So soot is what you were inhaling when the Canada wildfires occurred. And when you saw all of that smoke coming. So imagine when you don't see it. Sometimes ports can have a killer instinct. Some of them won't like me saying that. But a killer instinct is what we do, we just do, whether it hurts you or not. And that is not how ports should operate. We talked in the last session about private-public partnerships probably hurting environmental justice principles because people make these deals and have these conversations just amongst themselves with no regard for the impact that they have on our community. So soot pollution is important. When you think about environmental justice and near port communities, particularly on the East Coast, it always leads back to trucks. Trucks produce a lot of soot. Next slide. This slide, this is a little picture that I borrowed from the New Jersey Port Authority. We had a meeting with them recently, and it kind of outlines the operations of our port. Now, this is just in Newark. This is not reflective of New York and, of course, the other ports that we have throughout New Jersey. I like this slide here because we're talking about creating a graphic that would be a resource for both those who are stakeholders and also at the port, our local elected officials who the port likes to talk to without environmental justice people. Next slide, I'm sorry. And also, but pretty much it's the maritime, looking at the maritime and understanding how does the supply chain affect us. I don't think the cargo owners, the shippers understand that. I don't think many of those who are the administrators of our ports understand that. And if folks within the environmental justice community are not educated on it, how can they best advocate for themselves, right? And so it's not, what we know is that if you give them the information, if you give them the facts, we would make the best decision for ourselves. And so it is the idea of this graphic is saying this is where they've been in terms of their supply chain and how things, where it starts from and how it comes to our community. We want to go a step further where we're actually dropping down. This is how this level, this stage impacts our portside and frontline communities. The next slide, and you see tons of things here that were problems. So they acknowledge, you got to give it a name, and they did here. Next slide. The next slide shows where they want to be. You see, it's no problems. It's possible, but we have to continue to chip away at the issue. Next slide. Endless possibilities for Mid-Atlantic. This is something that can be shared with you as well, so I won't go through it. But
Go back.
Next-
one slide. There you go.
So this highlights the IPCC report that talked about port pollution. And when I came into Friends of the Earth in February, they had not separated the pollution that specifically comes from trucks, right? And so when you don't do that, it sends an unfair picture of the pollution and how much the trucking alone impacts our community. And so this talks about if we push and advocate for electrification of our ports, how that can benefit us health-wise significantly. So the challenge is how do we get here? And we need folks from the community to be a part of that conversation. The port cannot figure it out by themselves with politics. And how do we get to shore power and how do we protect ourselves during storms, right? Those are some key questions. So these are just some stats about that. PM 2.5 is the legal term, I'll call it, for soot. So soot is also PM 2.5 when you hear about that. Next slide. I wanted to highlight some port priorities to say, we must acknowledge when folks are making the commitment and getting the work done. But we also, again, in ongoing engagement and conversations, these are some of them. 35% reduction of Port Authority GHG emissions by 2025 and then 50% reduction by 2030. How do we get there? That's the question, right? And how long will it take? Programs that are working that they've had, and these are programs that you can call the New York or email the New York and New Jersey Port Authority, use your organization to advocate. IRA funding, $3 billion. This is a time when you can enhance the truck replacement program. They replaced 935 trucks, which sounds like a lot, but when you look at how much time it took, how long it took, we can do better. The funds are here now to apply to have ambitious programs. They have a clean vessel incentive program that I think is great. Again, more and better. And so these are the programs you should be advocating for and pushing our port leaders to apply for funding in collaboration with the frontline communities. Cargo handling equipment, and their current program is supporting truck electrification. They're adding some charging stations. That's a part of the challenge for the Mid-Atlantic. New Jersey is an area that many trucking firms are really interested in, but we do not know where, we would have to build one charging station every day for 15 years in order to meet the zero emissions goal. So again, it's getting down to how we get there and communicating with the federal folks to make sure the grants are not providing barriers to get this work done. Next slide. How can the government support? We talked about the $3 billion IRA funding. Push it. It's a priority. This is unprecedented. And then there's also $450 million a year that goes into the Department that's available to the Department of Transportation. So those are just two key funding sources that come from our federal government. We talked about SOOT. Again, Black folks and Hispanics are the most affected. We're talking about miscarriages and other serious complications that occur from the air that we breathe. All right, and there's something we can do about it. Something that the court can do about it. Next slide. Justice 40. The president has mandated, okay, that 40% of funds that go to the community go to environmental justice communities. Again, unprecedented, never happened. What I love about this piece of legislation is that it's not specific to the Environmental Protection Agency, but all federal agencies. Okay, so that's great. This is how we can help folk. I'll share this information with you. How folk can help courts. And next slide. And also how folk can help environmental justice groups. The last question is probably the most important. Not just about what we say we can offer you, but asking the question, how can folk help you as an EJ group? Ask directly the same way to the court. Who do you need to hear from and how can we help you? Next slide. Transformational partnerships are, I think, necessary, and that's what we should be pushing the court toward versus only transactional partnerships. And someone said in the last session that transactional is okay sometimes, but we need to move towards transformational, meaning I don't give you $50,000 as the EJ group to sign a support letter and you don't understand how this is helping or hurting you. And so when you have transformational partnerships, it's really about making the change and bringing all folks to the table. I will end with this slide, 17 principles of environmental justice. Become familiar. You don't have to be the whole movement. If you can connect to one of the 17 principles, you are now an environmental justice advocate. And we want to help you go from advocate to activist. Okay, activist to advocate. And the difference is we put policy behind it. We're not just talking about speaking with passion. We're speaking about in this regard from a policy perspective. The last thing I'll say is join us on the right side of history. Being your best advocate, staying engaged, understanding that all politics are local is the greatest step forward.
Thank you, Terrence, for the wonderful presentation. You
So
definitely
fast, too.
no, but it's good. I tried to keep the slides on for a few seconds, just to let folks kind of take it and look at the numbers. I mean, it's millions of dollars. How many? It's.
And if you want to we can share it again.
Yeah, definitely. I think folks would love to get a copy of your slide deck as well. So, Zoom.
Oh, there's a question?
No, Dinah.
Can someone speak on Zoom, please? Or unmute yourself? Hello. Okay. I have Miss Anderson's presentation up. It's right here. So can we project her on? That should be her. All right, Miss Anderson, do you want to go ahead and speak?
Hello.
Yes. Okay, we can hear you. You might have to project a little bit, but I think this will work. So I have your slides up, and just say next slide, and I'll run through it.
Yeah, I can't see the slides.
Because this is not on the Zoom. This is on. Can we share?
Yes. Yeah, okay, share your screen. 1 second.
Okay.
She should be seeing whatever you see.
Okay, could she share her screen if she has permission to?
Yes, yes.
Okay, that's what's happening.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, can you share your screen with your slides?
Before she needed permission, maybe it'll work now.
Yes, I need permission.
Okay, 1 second. I'm sorry, 1 second.
Try more. I think it's a shortcut to more.
We're not signing in. And I'm not signing in Zoom, and I don't have the permission to give her permission for that, because they think about that.
I mean, she could present offline. I can.
Yes, so present offline.
Yeah, Miss Anderson, we can coordinate. So I'll pull up the slides, but we can coordinate. So you can just pull them up on your own computer, if that makes sense.
Okay,
Okay.
give me a
So,
second.
yep. So we have your title slide up right now. Oh, can we get my computer back?
There you go.
There we go. All right, we're ready whenever you are.
Okay, I'm. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Dinah Anderson, and I am the program manager at New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance is an alliance of organization individuals working together to identify, prevent, and eliminate environmental injustices that exist within communities of color and low-income communities. Next slide.
You may have to project a little bit louder, Ms. Anderson, just a little bit.
Okay, can you hear me better?
Yep, it's a little better. Yep.
Okay. So this is the map of Port New York and New Jersey. As others have mentioned, this port is the largest container port on the East Coast and the second, sometimes third largest in the nation based on container volume. The port moved approximately 271 billion worth of goods last year. The top bulk commodities are that are being handled at the port are salt, cement, scrap, orange juice, and Belgian block. Next slide. This is a map of the port of Camden, which is a major U.S. port handling imported wood products and mentioned a growing number of products of steel products. Next slide. Give me a second, my laptop froze, so I can't go to my next slide. Okay, so the current states of emissions at the ports. These charts show carbon dioxide and fine particulate matter data from the port of Los Angeles, the port of Long Beach, and the port of New York and New Jersey. In 2019, all three ports emitted over 2.5 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Port New York, New Jersey emitted a little above 500,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent and a little under 250 US tons of fine particulate matter. Why are these numbers important? These numbers are important because nearby port communities are often communities of color, low-income communities, and they face higher levels of air pollution that comes from the ports. Next slide. Daily in New Jersey, over 20,000 trucks go in and out of our ports. 75% of the trucks stay within 50 to 75 miles of the ports. They go through Newark, Camden, Elizabeth, Bayonne, Jersey City, and Rahway to warehouses, distribution centers, delivery station, and other facilities. Over 1.2 million containers arrive by ship daily. The majority of the containers arriving are moving by trucks. The additional by rail. Over 15% of the goods from the ports are moved by rail. New Jersey is home to over 1,000 miles of freight rail line. Locomotive and port operations are the major contributors to nitrogen oxide, fine particulate matter, black carbon, and carbon dioxide, which are impacting our air quality. The highest emission burdens can be found in location close to high-density truck and bus routes, location close to port facilities and rail yards. Next slide. The port has over 1 billion square feet of space for warehousing and distribution located within 15 miles of the marine terminal close to freight routes. 47 of those warehouses are located in Newark, Elizabeth, and Bayonne. The Port of Camden has 45 warehouses that are located in close proximity to residential communities, schools, and recreational facilities. Next slide. All of the warehouses on this map are owned by the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey. This map does not account for additional warehouses, as Ms. Gaddy mentioned, that are around that are privately owned. If you look at the map, you will see a high concentration of warehouses. These are all in or adjacent to where individuals live, go to school, work, and play. Concentrating warehousing close to port perpetuates racist land use practices in already overburdened communities. Next slide. In New Jersey, there's a pattern of proximity of goods movement and transportation infrastructure, largely in communities of color and low-income areas of the state. Our communities experience higher levels of air pollutants known to impact human health, such as fine particulate matter and nitrogen oxide. Heavy traffic and harmful emissions damage our air quality and health. The ports provide essential economic activity at the price of our communities and environment. Many of those who work in the ports do not make a livable wage, and sometimes they do not receive benefits. The work environment is not safe, and they do not have the right to organize. Next slide. Communities located near to the ports and other goods movement infrastructure, such as warehouses, logistics centers, rail yards, experience higher level of truck traffic, both from surrounding throughways and on local street, which worsen health concerns. These emissions are responsible for 21,000 early deaths annually and are linked to asthma, cancer, and other health conditions. To give personal examples, I live near the port, rail yards, warehouses, and constantly have to face traffic congestion. In simpler terms, I live in a diesel dead zone. I have health problems that I did not have prior to moving to my current residence. The hardest impact tends to be the towns around ports and large diesel truck corridors. For example, as Ms. Gaddy said, 1 in 4 children in Newark has asthma. Keep in mind that Newark is as I mentioned before, you have a lot of diesel pollutant activity going on in Newark daily. Next slide. Action. So I just talked about the brunt of the goods movement system. So what would we like to see happen? We would like to see a reduction in emissions by electrifying trucks, cargo handling equipment used at ports, warehousing, and rail yards. We would like to see stronger emission standards for goods movement infrastructure and transportation. We would like to see employers earn livable wages, receive benefits, and be protected by ethical labor laws. We would like for local residents and businesses to benefit from the port's economic activity. Next slide. Call to action. If you're asking yourself what you can do about this, visit our website and sign up for a newsletter. Follow us on social media. Reach out to us for community engagement opportunities. Reach out to legislators. Reach out to the ports, warehouse developers. Sign on to campaign letters and donate. Next slide. Thank you for your time. And if you would like more information, my email is on the screen. You can reach out to me at any time. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Anderson, for coordinating with us as we had a little bit of technical issues, but definitely learned a lot from this. And again, we're going to have a Q&A at the end to accommodate any questions. So we put up the screen real quick. All right, so next up we have Miss Christine Schell. So I will pull up your presentation And I think we'll do the same format where she'll run through the slides and we'll share it on the screen. Okay.
Okay, then. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect.
You may have to project a little bit like Ms. Anderson did, though.
Oh, I'm a Jersey girl, so I'm usually being told to shh. So, hopefully I'll be loud enough. Thank you all for coming to this. I am going to give you more of a statewide view on environmental justice. So right now, sorry, my computer just,
Access to share. That's the problem.
yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit broader. So if you go to the off my title slide to the second slide.
Yep.
We are going to talk about New Jersey's environmental justice law, as Kim Gaddy and Dr. Lumbach know, because they fought very hard for this in New Jersey. In September of 2020, Governor Murphy signed a law which gave what should be common to everyone, but recognize that all New Jerseyans, regardless of their income, race, ethnicity, color, or national origin, have a right to live, work, and recreate in a clean and healthy environment. And it recognizing that that has historically not been true, and that those communities have been disproportionately impacted by environmental and public health stressors, that something needed to be done to address the legacy of citing sources of pollution in overburdened communities, which continue to threaten health, well-being, and economic success of those vulnerable residents. Next slide, please. The law went further and found that those communities no community should bear the disproportionate share of adverse environmental and public health consequences that accompany a state's economic growth. That the state's overburdened communities must have meaningful opportunity to participate in those decisions that are being made in their community, and that the public interest of the state, where appropriate, is to limit future placement and expansion in such facilities in overburdened communities. Next slide, please. As a 30+ year veteran of DEP, mostly in the air and climate space, I cannot tell you what this law gave to DEP in terms of being able to do more than we could ever have done. It allows us to look at facilities more broadly and consider impacts beyond what's coming out of the stack or what's being discharged into the water. And that in and of itself is a major initiative for the state of New Jersey. The law itself sets criteria. It establishes what is an overburdened community through census block groups that meet certain percentages, like the slide says, of low income communities, residents identified as minority or tribal communities, and or those that are households with limited English proficiency. You'll note, and it's highlighted, that that's an or. So you can just be one of those three things, and you're considered an overburdened community based on the demographics in New Jersey. In addition, the law establishes what the facility types are that are regulated under this law. So major sources of air pollution, incinerators and resource recovery facilities, large sewage treatment facilities, transfer stations and other solid waste facilities, recycling facilities, scrap metal facilities, landfills, and medical waste incinerators, with limited exceptions. Finally, the law establishes which permit types that the department gives, which are impacted by the law. So individual solid waste and recycling, land use, water supply and pollution, and air pollution permits for new facilities expansion, and what we call Title V renewals. So very broad authority, cross-media attention to the impacts on these overburdened communities. Next slide, please. It also provided for us the overarching categories of environmental and public health stressors, which are contained right there. So concentrations of air pollution, mobile sources, contaminated sites, transfer stations and other solid waste facilities, recycling and scrap yards, and point sources of water pollution. Or, and this is a little bit of a catch-all at the end, any condition that may cause public health impacts, including but not limited to asthma, cancer, elevated blood lead levels, cardiovascular disease, and developmental problems. While these broad categories were established by the law defers to DEP to establish which specific stressors are used to make these permitting decisions. Next slide. And so that's where EJMAC comes through. And actually, if I was controlling my slides, I was going to go through a little demo, but let's talk a little bit about EJMAP. EJMAP is a tool, public-facing tool that does a few things. It has a tab that allows you to see where our overburdened communities are. Remember, those are just those that are set by demographics. So if you're this map that you're looking at, these are the overburdened communities throughout New Jersey. So that's the first thing it allows you to do, to see where those communities are throughout New Jersey. It provides a tab that allows you to see where the existing facilities are in New Jersey. So all of those different facility types that I discussed earlier, major sources of air pollution, all the different types of solid waste facilities and recycling facilities. It allows you to see where they are in New Jersey now. And then the third thing that it does, which is kind of the meat and potatoes of EJMAP, is it defines 26 different environmental stressors within those larger categories, and it compares the values of the block group that you're looking for at your overburdened one to the county or state non-overburdened community 50th percentile. So basically it's taking a look at your community and it's comparing you to your non-overburdened neighbors at and seeing if you in that comparison are more stressed for each of those 26 categories. And those categories can contain a number of different stressors that include ozone levels, particulate matter levels, different cancer risks and non-cancer risks, including cancer risk specific to diesel particulate matter. So to go to our previous presenters, focus on the trucks coming in and out of the port. There are stressors that look at traffic, and it breaks that traffic down into cars and trucks, and railroads, which are also an issue for our ports to New Jersey. There are stressors about that look at our known contaminated sites and scrap metal facilities and solid waste facilities. We have stressors that look at our surface water and combined sewer overflow. And then we have catch-alls in that category where we're not looking at the public's health numbers per se, because that though public health data in New Jersey isn't meaningful at a block group level, which is pretty small, kind of like a neighborhood if you're thinking about it. And the numbers are not robust enough for that. So we look at other stressors like drinking water, potential lead exposure, lack of recreational open space and tree canopies, those things that we could leverage as surrogates for those other environment or public health impacts that are impacting our communities. We also look at what we call density or proximity stressors. These are things that look at the sites per square mile of different types of facilities. And this is a way for us to get at some of the more intangible impacts to our overburdened communities. So while looking at ozone and particulate matter will get you the air quality information, it's not going to give you the impacts of noise and dust and just kind of living in an environment where you're surrounded by these types of facilities. So that's another way, another lens that we're looking through in EJ Map. And then we also look at 2 additional determinants of health, unemployment, and education. And so what we do is we look at all of that information, we compare them individually to the county or the state, whichever one of those is lesser is what we call the geographic point of comparison. And then we total that up and we compare the totals again. So in the overburden community that I am currently looking at on my screen, which you cannot see, I apologize. The community itself has what we call a combined stressor total of 20. That means that 20 out of the 26 stressors are affecting this community more than it's affecting its non-overburdened neighbor. So in this particular case, this community is considered stressed because it's being compared to the geographic point of comparison, which is 10. So those non-overburdened communities are only being stressed by 10 of those. So this is just a quick overview, a very quick overview of EJ Map. We think it's a pretty valuable tool. It allows our communities to understand exactly how we're walking through and implementing the law, but broader than that, I think it gives our communities a sense of just what their status is and where they are and how they are being compared in the sense of either the county they live in or the state that they are in. The data in EJ Map is updated every 6 months in a sweep. So if new data becomes available in the 6-month period between January and July, we update that data. And that is a way for us to keep that data fresh and updated. And we have a ton of resources that are available on our overburdened community, on our Office of Environmental Justice website. So the next slide gives you just a full sweep of a lot of different information that we've created because of the law and as we move to implement the law. The rules that implement the law went into effect in April of this year. So that is where we are in terms of implementation. I think there's one permit that's come in since that April deadline that is actually going through the EJ process. But this page, and I'm sure that our slides will be shared out, gives you links to a lot of different tutorials and technical guidance and frequently asked questions that kind of will help you better understand this tool, this resource, and emphasize the way that we're looking at permitting in a broader sense. So I can't emphasize again enough what my predecessors on this panel have said, that we're no longer just looking at the impact of a facility and what's coming out of its stack, but also what kind of traffic it's bringing, what the runoff from that traffic might be doing to the water in the area, et cetera, in terms of impacts. So like I said, that was super quick. This is my email address. I'm happy to talk and answer questions on EJ Map or the EJ law. But hopefully that gave you like a 50,000 foot look at the new law in New Jersey.
Thank you for that. And unfortunately, we weren't able to kind of go deeply into the EJ Map tool here itself, but the tool is available on your website, correct? Just want to make that clear for our.
Yeah, I can actually drop a link to it in the chat if that's helpful.
Okay. And we have your email so folks can contact you as well.
Yes, feel free to call away.
Okay. All right, so last but not least, we have Dr. Lombok, and I'm just going to go ahead and pull your slides.
Okay, sounds good.
Oh, wait. Okay. Give us one moment. I love technology, right? Sometimes.
I can actually share my screen now.
Oh, you can share your screen?
Yeah,
Okay,
I don't know
perfect. We got
why.
that
How,
fixed.
but, I mean,
Okay.
can you see it now?
Yeah, we can see it. All right.
Wow. Yes, a miracle took place.
Dr. Lombok, I'm really super jealous right now.
So thank you for inviting me to speak and to join the panel. I really appreciate it. So I want to talk a little bit more about some of the technical or scientific aspects about how low-cost sensors like purple airs, but also other sensors that also work by optical properties, like how they have some limitations. I mean, they can be useful in certain circumstances, but they have some limitations even when they work really well. So I know there's been a lot of concern about purple airs and other low-cost monitors that sometimes they're not accurate. Often there might be questions about their accuracy and how reproducible they are. But even when they work really well, I think there's evidence that PM 2.5 or other PM that they're measuring, and they measure PM1 and PM10 as well, but that even when they're measuring PM 2.5 accurately, that PM 2.5 itself is not a good marker of diesel exhaust particulate matter, which is usually the concern in goods movement affected neighborhoods. And compounding that is the fact that these sensors don't measure the really small particles that come out of engines. They're unable to do that by their optical properties, by the method by which they measure particulate matter. And then even when they're accurate, they might change from one monitor to another. So if overall they give an accurate picture, if you have multiple monitors, especially like in a network, they may be accurate enough, especially to measure things like the wildfire smoke that we saw in the east, across the East Coast. Large differences in PM and events like that. But to measure like from one neighborhood to another, from one block to another, there's evidence that they vary so much that we can't always be sure, or in many cases can't be sure, that any difference we see is not due to the monitor responding differently compared to there being a real difference in diesel particulate matter from one neighborhood to another. And then I want to briefly discuss the alternatives. So we already have some evidence about how diesel particulate matter varies across the state, thanks to the work of the DP and Michelle's colleagues. So we have the EPA AirTox screen, which does modeling of diesel particulate matter, and then the risk of lung cancer from that exposure across the state. And so we see here that varies quite a bit across the state. And obviously it's going to be higher, as the colors indicate here, near the seaport and the airport and the network of highways that are close to Newark and Elizabeth and Jersey City. And it actually varies quite a bit, as you can see here, from less than 50 in a million to over 500 in a million. So that's a tenfold difference. And because cancer risk is proportional to the exposure, that means also that the concentrations that are modeled here of diesel exhaust particulate matter vary also tenfold here across the state. But this is model data, and you might say, well, that's questionable in terms of the reality. And then also these colored areas are quite broad, right? So it's not telling you what's happening again from like block to block or near a highway versus further away. So we do have some real measurements that are done by at 5 different central monitoring stations, but here we don't have much at all spatial coverage, right? So we have here monitors that are urban in Newark and Elizabeth and Camden, and then more suburban monitors in Chester and at Rutgers University. So we might expect we'd see some contrast in the amount of diesel particles here. And what's particularly interesting is that the Newark Firehouse, which is an urban sort of background measurement of diesel particulate matter, if that's what we're measuring, compared to the Elizabeth Lab, which is right next to the Turnpike interchange with Route 278. I'll show a map in a minute. We have an interesting comparison there between a highway adjacent site, the Elizabeth Lab, and the Newark Firehouse, which is more of an urban background. So if we look at the elemental carbon measurements that are done by the DEP at these sites, and elemental carbon is a pretty specific marker for diesel particulate matter, we see, as expected, that Elizabeth and Camden also, which is right across the Delaware from Philadelphia and also an industrial area and near highways and so forth, are quite high. Newark is somewhat lower, as we might expect, the firehouse being like in the center of the city, and then Rutgers and Chester, the suburban, being lower. It's sort of focusing more on the end of the graph here, 2021. Obviously there's been a trend of improvement, but today, or most recently in 2021, there's these relatively big differences. So Elizabeth Lab, like 80%, maybe more than Newark, and then Elizabeth, maybe 3 times as great as Rutgers as a background. So the Newark Firehouse, again, is located at the star here on this map, at the satellite image. And you can see that it's more than a mile away from Route 78 and other major highways. So it is a sort of more background urban milieu, air quality, ambient air quality. And here is the Elizabeth Lab, which is in Elizabeth, just a few miles away from the Newark Firehouse. And here the monitoring station is right next to the interchange. In fact, it's only a few feet away from the roadway. In the middle of, you can see the Turnpike here on the right and Route 278 and the circling roadways. And being next to the toll plaza means that it's next to the accelerating trucks, which then when they accelerate typically produce more particulate matter emissions, and multiple lanes, and this backs up during rush hour. So this would be like perhaps it's hard to imagine a hotter spot for diesel particulate matter than here. And then here's the monitoring station, also again right next to the roadway. So we can compare then the Elizabeth Lab, this location here, with the Newark Firehouse to see what the difference would be, the impact of all these roadways and this hotspot for diesel particulate matter emissions. So, it's always, when I first saw this, maybe 10 or 15 or more years ago, I was quite surprised that if you look at PM 2.5, this is an annual average, so, you might argue, well, there's differences time of day and so forth. But, just as a first cut, the annual average here for the Elizabeth Lab, which is, circled here on the left, compared to the Newark Firehouse, which is, a couple of columns over. And zooming in a little bit more here, again, Elizabeth Lab on the left, Newark Firehouse all the way over on the right. The difference in PM 2.5 on an annual basis is probably less than 10%. So what's happening here? Like, why is that? How could, we have so much more diesel particulate matter and not see that in PM 2.5? Well, PM 2.5 has many sources. Diesel particulate matter is only a small component generally, ambiently across the state. And then the other problem that we're going to have is if we try to use low-cost monitors to measure PM 2.5, it's not even going to pick up some of those smaller particles. But even, just with the best quality monitors, the DEP's federal reference or federal equivalent methods, we can't really see the impact with PM 2.5. And then this graph here, this figure, I wanted to show, it's a little complicated, but sort of how this is diesel particulate matter. This is like the concentration of particles, either the particle number, which is the solid line, or the particle mass, which is the dotted line, and how diesel exhaust, in terms of the number of particles, almost all of them are like less than 0.1 micron. That means they're ultrafine particles. And you can hardly even see the impact of the number, when it gets larger. But even that relatively small number of larger particles contributes to this dashed line, the dotted line, which is the weight of the particles, the mass of the particles. And that's what we measure when we measure PM 2.5. We don't measure this big blip of ultrafine particles on the left. We're measuring this dotted line of particles, the concentration of particles. And if we can't measure less than 0.3 microns with a purple air monitor, that means we're going to miss everything to the left of this vertical red line and not be able to see all of that. The area under the curve of the dotted line is the total number of particles. We're going to miss all of that. And so that makes it even less likely that measuring PM 2.5 with a purple air monitor is going to pick up diesel exhaust particles. So then the next issue that we have is that, again, purple airs, they vary from one monitor to another and how sensitive they might be to what they're measuring. And so this is a co-location of, there was actually 12 monitors that were co-located together with a DEP monitor at the Newark Firehouse, which is the blue line. So leaving aside the agreement, like with the blue line, which is the reference, just comparing the monitors to themselves, they're pretty highly correlated. They follow the same trend over time. But if you look at individual monitors, some always read anywhere from 10 to 20% higher than others, which means that if we took two of these different monitors, put them in two different locations, and saw that there was like a 10 or 20% difference, we wouldn't know necessarily if that's due to there being differences, like we put one next to the highway, put one further away. The difference would be due to the traffic emissions or just due to the monitors, having different responses, basically, responding differently to the same, presumably to the same. Here they're located together. They're sampling the same, or they're measuring the same air. So there's something different about the monitor, not the air. So what's the alternatives? Well, as mentioned earlier, as Kim mentioned about initiatives to use black carbon monitors, that's a more sensitive and more specific marker for diesel exhaust. Here's some measurements that we did on the roadside in Elizabeth with trucks passing, and you can actually see the impact of single trucks passing by. I don't have PM 2.5 on this, but we measured that also, and there was hardly like a blip in the PM 2.5. And then here's another figure showing some studies of upwind of roadways here to the left of the zero distance here, and then downwind to the right, and how you can see ultrafine particles with an ultrafine particle counter going out, thousands of meters potentially. Now, of course, the issue is that those types of monitors are much more expensive. They're harder to use. They have other limitations. So one solution, sort of a compromise, is to have mobile monitoring with sophisticated, highly accurate instruments that can then go anywhere in the state and presumably at any time, if we have a graduate student who's going to be on call. And so this is one possibility for trying to overcome the limitations of measuring the impact of goods movement on local neighborhoods by having a vehicle that can go out and then do this sort of mapping as indicated here, showing, if you can make that out, higher levels at different places, even just on one run. And the idea is that this could go out and do multiple runs in a location, characterized spatially, or it could go out and respond to events or emergencies. So overall, I think we've learned some things by using low-cost monitors. We have to think about what we can expect to find going forward, due to the limitations that are demonstrated, I think, in some of the measurements that have already been done, as well as what we can expect, knowing what we know about particulate matter and diesel exhaust particles. And we do have alternatives in terms of more sensitive measurements and instruments. They, again, have these limitations about cost and being harder to use. And the other concern has always been about, well, black carbon and ultrafine particles don't have standards, health-based standards. But as we've seen in South Ward and throughout New Jersey, really, to use the EPA standards now for PM 2.5, pretty much most of the state is below that. So it's hard to make that argument, oh, we're exceeding, the EPA standard. You can use the World Health Organization standard of 5 micrograms per cubic meter on an annual basis, but that gets some skepticism. So using a mobile monitoring platform, and this doesn't mean that it's not community engaged or community based, because again, it would be driven by community concerns and working with communities to identify potential hotspots and then evaluate them, and then sharing in the data and the interpretation. So this is a potential, I think, to make some improvements. The earlier slide that I show is actually, I didn't mention the state of Connecticut and the Connecticut's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection that just developed their mobile platform. So I'm looking forward again to working more with communities, the folks here and DP and all. I think trying to develop better ways and better methods of measuring the impact of goods movement on air quality in communities. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Lombok. And the mobile monitoring platform really reminded me of what ACLIMA's doing. So really excited to see how that moves forward. So I want to thank all of our panelists, both here and virtually, for joining us and presenting really informative information. I know it's 5 o'clock, but I do want to give the audience time to ask a couple questions before we move on to the plenary downstairs. So because we have folks on Zoom, feel free to come up and use the mic, introduce yourself, and then you can ask a question. Any questions? Well, feel free to approach the, Karen, do you have a question? Okay, well, feel free to approach the panelists who are here. And for those of you on Zoom, thank you again, and look forward to our next joint meeting that we have with SWIA. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vivek.
Thank you.
Thank you.